Hello and welcome to EMDRCM Live. This is an outreach of the Executive Master in Disaster Risk and Crisis Management from the country's premier graduate school for business and management, the Asian Institute of Management. We are live here in Makati City. This is our third episode. And before we go to our guest for this session, I have some announcement that we would like to get out of the way. The scheduled Women Leaders for Social Impact and Disaster Resilience Forum, scheduled on March 12, is postponed in light of the COVID-19 preparatory precautionary measures. Instead, there will be an online live session of the forum via live streaming at the Asian Institute of Management Facebook page. On the same date, March 12, from 1:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. with Attorney Leslie Cordero, Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist of the World Bank, and at the same time an AIM adjunct faculty. The master class on building area resilience for Calabarzon will push through March 12, 13, and 14. It's all about business continuity planning in the midst of COVID-19 and how to build back better. The venue for the Cavite leg will no longer be at the LaSalle Dasma compound. It will be announced later on where the final venue would be, but it will still push through at the scheduled time and date. The contact person for that, Jella Bagadyong, phone numbers will be outlined in the Facebook page. The Bicol Roadshow, Reimagining Bicol, Leading Innovations for Sustainable Development and Disaster Resilience, will be March 20, Naga City, March 21, Legazpi City, 1 to 5 p.m. And for those leg of the roadshow, contact Chef Lorento. The phone number will also be displayed on the Facebook page. So, our topic for today, in celebration of the recently concluded International Women's Day last March 8, is about women and disaster resilience. And we're very happy to have, for this particular episode, one of the vibrant members of the pioneering batch of the EMDRCM. And she will tell you all about her background, how she got into the disaster space. AJ Villar.
Good afternoon. Good evening, Wally.
Hi, AJ.
Hi.
Thank you for being part of the live stream.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone who's watching.
Okay, so first task, tell us how you got into the disaster space.
Getting into this disaster space was an organic thing for me. It started in 20...
When you were still in school?
2003, yeah. When I was still in school, and then Millennium happened. So a group of students just started...
It's okay to talk about the school. Okay, so this is in ADBU.
This is in Ateneo. So a group of mountaineers said, why don't we help our communities who were recently affected by the storm, by the floods. So it was an organic thing, and for us, there were a lot of dormers who said, hey, why don't we help out? So a lot of goods came in, a lot of donations came in from the alumni, and the dormers really spent time, literally night and day, repacking goods for the victims for the survivors of the flood, of the storm. So
after that, you decided to pursue a career in disaster management?
I was kind of just led into it because a couple of years later, for the Jesuit volunteer service, I was assigned in Bohol. So
this was after the earthquake?
This was after the 2013 earthquake. So imagine that time you had the Bohol earthquake, then you had Yolanda, and then you had the Zamboanga siege. So I was assigned in 2014 in Bohol, and there wasn't a lot of rehabilitation work going on because of the 3 different disasters that happened. So in the community, I taught basic first aid and general community resilience. I focused on teaching high school medics to do first aid.
This is under the Jesuit Volunteer Program.
Yes,
and then you started to fall in love with disaster risk management.
Yes. After the service, I got into teaching into public schools and did a research paper on how to enhance disaster resilience in fifth graders. So
Okay.
that was the study of my stay in a public school in Bulacan, and eventually I applied for the Department of Education Disaster Risk and Reduction Management Service.
Can you explain that part? This is a service of the Department of Education, and its primary focus.
Is on its primary focus is on making our learners more resilient.
Okay, so public schools, no?
Public schools, and of course we also create policies that would apply for private schools as well. We want everyone to be able to have access to creating resilience from this for themselves. So going in the office, we got a lot of training, and it was really fun. It was work that I knew as an individual can contribute to the country. So there's really passion into doing this.
Okay, so right now you're still connected to the DepEd.
But I transferred to a different office, more focused on policies.
Right, okay. So the many years that you have been hands-on doing disaster efforts,
Yes.
you've seen a lot of women on the ground.
Yes, I've seen a lot of remarkable women. One of the women who really struck me was this teacher in Marawi after the siege, where she was a principal at that time, and she had to deal with all of this damage to her school. She had to deal with the students
So
having
just
to
to
relocate.
contextualize this was after the siege.
Yes, in
Where part of
2007.
the start of the rehabilitation for the place.
Yes.
Okay, so I could imagine there are a lot of things that she had to worry about aside from reopening the school.
Yes. So imagine a teacher's life is very hard. You have to manage a lot of the things, but pile on top of that the disaster rehabilitation work that has to go in. There's a lot of negotiations. There's a lot of handling the trauma to the students.
And that's
trying to
not
figure-
care of the barangay disaster risk office. It would fall on the hands of the principal and the teachers, right?
It would be a community effort.
Okay.
So, since teachers are in the front line, they're the first line of defense, so to speak, of the students.
And that's not by design.
It's
It
not by
just so
design.
happens that most of the public schools are converted into evacuation centers,
Yes.
and teachers are required to help out, or are they voluntary in during evacuations? How is that?
Teachers take care of their schools, of course. So, even if we're not required, DSWD is the one task to do
Okay.
that. But even if we're not required, we would find time and space to help out because we also want to take care of the school environment, which after the evacuation is done, this space will be our teaching space. We have to also think about that, have some foresight about
Right.
that.
So going back to this principal from the Marawi school, why
Yeah.
was she remarkable?
The trauma to the children it's really heartbreaking. So we provided basic psychological first aid at that time, and the stories of the children will really shake you.
Okay, for the people who might not be familiar with the Marawi siege, what are the trauma that the kids went through? For example,
There's a kid that I spoke to who said that it became normal for her to hear helicopters bombing the nearby city because it was the city and then you have the nearby schools. So she was in the nearby schools. And then it was so normal for her to see bullets see bullets and bullet holes in their classrooms. And you have these learners just wanting to go and study and learn something, but you also have the trauma of hearing bombs.
then I could
hearing-
imagine probably some of the children lost their parents and their relatives.
Yes.
Okay, so the task of the principal is not just ensuring that school goes back to normal operations and the education continues, but also making sure that the psychological well-being of the kids are attended to.
Yes, it's very important because
Now, going back to your point, it falls on the hands of the teachers.
it falls in the hands of the community and the teachers.
Right.
So the teachers help out. The teachers also receive, the Marawi teachers also were had trauma, but of course, since they're the teachers, I would say not they weren't forced, but necessity called them to be better so that their students could also see that, hey, my teacher's this strong rock that if she's okay, maybe I can be okay. So, you know, it's a teacher's job is really to be that role model. And there are a lot of women teachers who are really, really, really tough.
Okay. Would you say that the teaching profession by default is more for women, or is that a sexist thing to say?
By trend,
By
there
trend.
are a lot of women.
Is there a science behind the fact that in the Philippines and probably in other places as well,
This is my personal
Okay.
opinion. Maybe someone will say something against it, but
if the science behind it, you can probably share it in the comments.
the science behind this, women are more equipped to be multitaskers.
Equipped to be multitaskers.
Equipped.
Ouch to the men.
Yes, because according to our teacher in class, women's brains, people's brains are connected by a bridge, the corpus callosum,
Okay.
which integrates both information that's processed by the brain. So women's tend to be a little thicker. So because of that, we have more ability to think about many different things at the same time. So if you're a teacher and then you're thinking about the class and then the attendance and then that little kid who's peeing in the corner and all of these other things, it's really it really requires a lot of multitasking. So I guess a lot of teachers or a lot of women are more
Predisposed.
patient,
Okay,
patient.
I will not argue on the
The science side
scientific
of
basis of what you said. So, if you are saying that women are more inclined to be good at multitasking, then that would make women perfect for disaster risks management.
that. Yes. For the task of managing different things, not just in response, in preparation, preparedness, response. The entire thing, looking at it at a bigger picture, women can really take a step back and say, "Oh, maybe something's overlooked over here."
More
Or-
than men.
More than men.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to really point fingers, but there are a lot of issues that get overlooked, especially in the heat of the moment.
Okay.
Let's say you're
Women
in,
issues.
Yes, women issues. You have. There might be times when someone will have to evacuate a person, and then for women and women's bodies, we might be sensitive to our private parts. We might be sensitive.
Might, not all the time.
Not all the time. Not everyone will be sensitive.
And
about
people
that.
can probably argue that in the heat of the moment, when everything is crazy and chaotic,
We won't
people
think about
probably
that.
would not notice if somebody accidentally touches
Yes.
their private parts.
Yes.
But it's something that's worth considering.
It's something that's worth considering, and not everybody will be comfortable with that. Take into account the hijabs or
For the sake of the people who might not be familiar, what is a hijab?
A hijab is a veil that Muslim women wear to show their
As a manifestation of their faith.
as a manifestation of their faith. So, in a rescue situation, it might fly off or it might get soiled. So it might be something that they would have to consider down the line. But of course, again, in the heat of the moment, it's not immediately
So
done.
it's not just women's sensitivity, it's also maybe cultural
Maybe
and
cultural.
religious sensitivity.
Yes. But you know, in the middle level response, when the heat of the moment has died down, you have women in evacuation centers who will definitely get affected because sometimes women could have their menstruation and the evacuation center or the evacuation place might not necessarily have good hygiene facilities. So clean running water
Right.
might
And
not be available.
For example, for men who don't go through this monthly experience, I guess it's quite easy to not think about it when preparing for, planning for, or attending to an emergency situation. Is that
Not
a
in the heat of the
fair
moment.
observation?
It's it's a fair observation for a disaster space that's very young.
Okay.
What the nice thing about the Philippines is we're developing that, and more, even though it's not yet perfect right now, women's concerns are being attended to in evacuation centers.
Is it that important?
Oh yeah, it's important.
What
just-
are the problems that can come up in an evacuation center that's related to women issues?
women's health more
Women, okay,
specifically?
wow.
Just in December, I went and interviewed a rural health unit head in Zamboanga City, and she was telling me about the different women's issues that they encountered in the transitory site. So
Wait, this is
in Zamboanga, after the Zamboanga siege,
Okay.
which happened in 2013,
the transitory site, meaning
it was a long-term evacuation camp.
so these are not the final
No.
place for them to be
No.
resettled.
It's not the resettlement place.
Oh,
It's
okay.
a transition place.
So what are the women's issues that were?
She did mention some women being raped.
Wow,
The rape happens in
in an
in
evacuation
an
camp.
evacuation camp. There was a spike in
And
pregnancies.
people know this? Is it something that really happens a lot?
That's a challenge, see, Wally, because not all women would be upfront and say, I got raped. It's a challenge for the health workers as well and the social welfare workers as well. 'Cause
So the
there's
woman
social stigma.
victimized would not volunteer that information to even their family
Yeah.
members.
Sometimes it's their family members that do it.
Ouch.
So
And this
it happens.
is this something that people are conscious of?
I wouldn't think so unless you've been in that kind of situation. So let's say you haven't been in an evacuation
I haven't.
camp, have you? So you wouldn't really be aware of it. But people who've already been there in a prolonged evacuation would have an inkling, but it's not necessarily something you talk about because we have cultural sensitivities like why would you talk about the sex life of your neighbor?
No, but it's also quite strange to hear about rape, for instance, in evacuation camps, when you'd think that because they are in such a weird
Close
situation,
yes.
that they would have time to think about and go through and worry about sex and those stuff.
But wala kang magawa eh. Guys wouldn't be doing anything. There's a lack of livelihood. So what do? You try to be closer to your wife, or you.
Okay.
It happens. It's an unfortunate reality. Women and children. It happens to children as well, and it's sad, but there are a lot of people concerned about it. People who are aware, who have disaster managers who have experienced seeing that in camps, and we're trying to address it. It's not yet perfect, but it's good that more and more organizations, more and more people say that this is happening, this is something that we should watch out for.
So what I'm getting from you, AJ, if you are in the disaster risk management space and you're preparing for evacuation, then it might also help in the proper maintenance of the camp to really set it up in such a way that women are protected.
Yes, that's it's good. I've seen. I think it was Pasig that demonstrated their evacuation scenarios, and there are specific spaces for breastfeeding. They have those little cube
Kiosk,
tents,
okay.
kiosks that are for women and children, and they created space. And I'm sure a lot of the different LGUs are also going towards that. It's something that people everywhere should be a little bit more aware of. So that's why we're talking about
That's
it.
why
now.
we're talking about it, and good that topic was raised because the first time I heard about it, it blew my mind because,
Happens.
well, you would think people are distraught and would not think about it. But, okay, it happens, it's a reality. And the good thing about it, now that you know, is prepare and plan for evacuation better. It's not a blanket model, template, setup that you can just, okay, set up right now and everything is cool. You have to really follow some guidelines. And there are guidelines.
There are guidelines. There's this thing called Sphere guidelines, and even the NDRIMC has a set of kits. I saw the kits. They say that this is the dignity pack for women. It contains wet wipes, tissue, napkin, feminine hygiene, feminine wash. So on the national level, we know that this is what women would need, and this is how donors, if they want to help, could ask, could say that, oh, I think this is how I can help. Maybe, I know, feminine hygiene product
Right.
companies would say,
In the scheme
"Oh,
of
this-
things, people don't think about this stuff. They would worry about food, they would worry about
it's
clothing.
always food and clothing, and you have ukay-ukays in the evacuation centers already, but women hygiene, feminine hygiene is one of the biggest.
Is that
things
such a
overlooked.
big deal?
Oh yes,
Okay.
because women who have menstruation would have to change their their sanitary pads maybe 2 or 3 times, depending on their flow.
And the menstruation doesn't stop when there's a disaster or
Oh, no,
there's
it
an
doesn't.
emergency.
It's there. It's there when it's there. It has its own timeline. So, after a few hours, it would start to smell. It means that there's bacteria already teeming there. So, you know, we have to change, because if not, we're gonna get sick. So it's a health issue. It's not just a matter of like I want to be pretty. It's a matter of I
Okay.
have to be clean.
Can you say that again? It's not something that is for vanity.
It's not for vanity.
It's for valid health reasons.
It's for valid health reasons.
And well, now that I know, I'm normally not very mindful of this stuff because, I don't know, initially probably because I'm quite naive, the thinking would be these are not as important as food and water and the other stuff. But
It's important.
clearly, it's something that has to be put in the mix when you're helping out in the evacuation areas.
You know what I like about evacuation centers is it becomes community centers as well. So people talk. And when people talk, we learn more about the different issues, which is why after during my time in Bohol, one of the pillars of the community engagement there was mobilizing the women. So
Mobilizing the women to do what?
to help out with their disaster preparedness. So
Okay.
they were the ones saying, "Oy, let's go to this class and see what we can do for first aid. What are the posters that we can put up? What are the things we can do in this community that could make us safer?" So these they were church women because I was with a Jesuit program, so they were church women. But these women would say, how can we help? How can we say that? How can we get the kids to help out? How can we get our husbands to help out? But because the women had a sense of community, they were aware of the different problems that their families or the community might be having, and say, hey, maybe you need this more than I do, so you can get this.
That's an interesting point. You mentioned that the women are the ones who rally their family, their kids, their husbands into contributing to the community effort. Probably that's also an area where we can mobilize the women to contribute in the other thematic areas of disaster risk management.
Yeah.
So not just in recovery, maybe also in preparation and preparedness, right?
Yes, yes.
What about in response? Are women suited to also go through the physical challenge of rescues, first responders, those stuff? Or is it something that's more for the men? Again,
This
we're
is a
trying to
very
be not-
controversial topic. I'm a flaming feminist. I would say kaya ng babae. I would say women can do what men do, but I have to acknowledge that there are some physical limitations.
Like going back to your problem with menstruation.
Menstruation's always a
I
problem.
wonder, would that really make a deep impact when you're trying to do relief efforts, when you're trying to attend to an emergency?
Yeah. So I remember this one time when we were in Andoy, and I was waist deep in mud. So I was in mud in
Flood
flood waters. It was lucky because I didn't have my menstruation at that time. But had I had my menstruation at that time, I would not go into that water because, of course, it's dirty and it would present logistical problems. Anything else could be trained for. Of course, strength is always debatable. So
Right.
strength is debatable because I'm stronger than a couple of men I know.
And you look stronger than I am. So.
But there are, of course, women who might be physically smaller stature, who might get challenged. Do you know why? So even in airplanes, flight attendants are required a certain height, men and women alike, but they're required a certain height because of logistical problem. Because of
Reality.
height
So they
problem.
have to
Yes.
close
So,
the hatch. So
it's really
you are
just
trained in first aid. So is it that much difficult for a woman compared to a man doing first aid? Because in some occasions you would have to carry the
in search and
patient.
rescue. It's a challenge. I cannot carry you. A 4-foot girl, our friend SJ, will not be able to carry you. But there are techniques. It can be learned, but it's something more that you have to study. So it might be a little bit more challenging.
Okay. But it doesn't seem like we can discount women when it comes to
Oh, no.
response.
There are a lot of women, pretty awesome women who are working in the response field.
These are
I've met a
health
couple of women firefighters. They're pretty badass.
firefighters.
Firefighters in Bohol. And they actually join in the rescue operations.
That's an interesting anecdote. I haven't heard really of women in firefighters.
It happens. I didn't
Except
see
the
them.
ones
I
that I've
didn't-
seen on TV, but I wouldn't think it's quite common because you don't see a lot of them.
No, you don't see a lot of them. There's always a
But that is such a
field.
very physically challenging
yes,
role.
Yes.
Is-
So
okay, so that might also be a good thing to ask. Are there roles that women are not expected to go into when you talk about disaster risk management? Or, okay, let's just keep that space, give it to the guys to do it.
what do you mean?
For
I'm not
example,
sure.
okay, so aside from the physical challenges of the response, are there other areas of the disaster space where, okay, let's just leave it to the guys?
I wouldn't think so. If a
There's
person
none.
no, if a person really wants to get into that, let's say I want to get into data, I could go into data. Our classmate EJ would want to be a pilot. She can do that.
She is a pilot.
She is a pilot. she is a pilot. I wouldn't. I can't think of.
Well, how
any
would you explain
space.
that in the class there are about 40 of us and only 10 are women?
I wouldn't say it's representative of the whole disaster resilience field. It might be just a matter of reaching out to women out there who want to do this a little bit more. And if there are ladies who want to go into the field, it's perfectly accessible. We can access it. We can find our own spaces. And, studying here is a journey personally for me because I'm finding the niche where I want to go. This is what I want to do in the disaster field. It's not a limiting space.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
So there are room for women to go into
Oh, yeah.
disaster risk and crisis management, and that's a plug for the program. This is one interesting statement that I'm hesitant to ask because it might raise a lot of eyebrows. Women are more emotional than men, and then this might get in the way of getting things done in terms of disaster risks and disaster management. Is that
I'm raising my eyebrows.
okay? So you don't agree? Women are not not more emotional than men.
I wouldn't claim that.
Okay.
I wouldn't claim that. I think it's really up to the individual. Maybe it's got to do with the science of it all. That for men, if they think about technical stuff, it's just technical stuff, and then women can see technical stuff and all of these other
Which goes
things.
back to your point about multitasking.
Yes, and if anything, it's an advantage.
Being multitasker and emotional.
Being not necessarily emotional. Emotional is the product of the whole thought
Okay.
process. So, if the emotions just a manifestation of being in touch with their feelings and stuff, but if girls are able to see the bigger picture, then see more connections between the technical aspect of the field and the social aspect of the field, then maybe, and this might raise eyebrows, we can make more informed decisions. Now, it might not be a good idea to what's a recent disaster? It might not be a good idea to
Set up, for example, very limited space for evacuation center for Taal.
yes.
Especially during that time, we didn't know how long the
We
alert
didn't. That
level
was
going to be.
that was the first of its kind in a very long time. That was the first of its kind that's prolonged in this general vicinity. So that's something that has to be thought about.
Okay. Well, there was also some arguments about women being labeled more emotional. That can be advantageous because they care more. They would look at everybody on a more motherly way, fashion. So their approach would be more gentle, I guess. So maybe that's another way of looking at it.
What do you mean gentle? Like more personal?
More personal, more relatable.
It could help for frontliners. It could help for frontliners, especially those who have to deal with people who are already who already have heightened emotions. You can have a dad whose family just died, or you have a person who just lost his house and his pig is at home and he wants to feed it. So you could have someone more in touch with their emotions to empathize, and I could not discount this. I could not emphasize this enough, but empathy is very important in our field because
You have to put yourself in the shoes of
in
that
their
person.
shoes, understanding what survivors are going through, it will really help you be in touch with the survivors and make decisions logically as well. So you're for us who are in the disaster and crisis management field, we should have that access to empathy and the technical side of things. So this COVID-19 crisis
Problem,
right
yeah.
now, of course, an emotional person would say, I have to take care of my family. I have to take care not to get sick myself because I care for people. But we also want to look at it with a cold eye. That are the reported cases, I think it's 35 now.
35 now.
Are the 35 cases now only a matter of because there's more people reporting or not? So the trick for us is to balance being a good neighbor, or to balance being a good human being versus managing the different sides aspects of the disaster.
Okay, so we've covered practically the four thematic areas. What about in the bigger picture of resilience? How can we tap into the women power that's intrinsic in every woman that we have in the country or also elsewhere? How can we tap into the power of women to drive resilience?
Women haven't really been tapped, to be honest.
Not yet.
Not yet. Haven't been tapped. Like I was telling you earlier, community building with women involved can create a big pay it forward scheme. It's a ripple effect. By empowering women.
Can you explain that again? So because women tend to also gather
Yeah.
naturally, and in the rural communities, they are left to take care of the kids. In a certain time, they all gather together and share stories and share updates about what's going on. So this is a platform that can be tapped
It can be
in
tapped.
driving resilience.
It can be tapped. It's an interesting field to look at. It's an interesting avenue for social experts to look at. Na how can we use this sense of community between women? And a good example of how it has worked is this community in Batangas that I personally go to a lot. The women.
Where is this?
This is in Isla Verde in Batangas.
Isla Verde, the center of the world's
Yes.
biodiversity
in the world.
in the world.
In the world. So that place is beautiful. They just had I'm plugging just a little bit. They just had a documentary about the island last Sunday. But the women of the community, the partner community I go to, run the place. The barangay captain's a guy, but practically the concejalas of the community, well, they're all women. And then, or maybe one guy. But what I've seen in their resilience is they've created a very tight-knit group of people. So, if you think about it, this is Batangas, this is Isla Verde, and this is Mindoro. And that passage is the favorite of the storms. They go through there in and out. But the women there have this amazing system where even before a storm, even before anything happens, they would clean up, they would say, maybe we can put our trash over here.
And the women are the ones leading
It's the
this.
women who are driving it. They constantly post updates on Facebook. Hi, Ate Grace. But they constantly talk to the community, give updates. They use social media. They're very tech savvy. They use messenger groups, and it's not just those little actions, but it's also their little events on creating a sense of community. Okay. So because the barangay has a sense of community, it's easier for the barangay captain, whoever will be in that position, to say, do this or do that in a time of disaster. Because it creates a trust. And I think the women of that community really played a part in creating trust among the inhabitants.
Okay, so you answered that question about women champions of resilience.
Yes.
And these are the ladies at Isla Verde.
Yes.
Probably one of the few questions that we need to answer also tonight. What are the challenges for women going into the DRCM space? Aside from the usual problems that we talked about earlier, like your monthly period and you have no control with that.
I think that maybe women don't really want to advertise. This is personal. I wouldn't know about others, but
Advertise meaning
we
claim
don't
the
wanna
spotlight.
say that we're doing this, we're doing that. We just wanna get our work done.
outsourcing. Men are the more
Vocal
okay.
about it. They Men communicate what they're doing better, maybe.
Or more aggressively?
More aggressively, it could be that. But it might be a challenge if we want more access to get to talk to people. So, getting the work done first might be a bigger priority than just than
Showcasing what you've done, what you've accomplished.
showcasing, because something's when you're
But
done with that,
there's
we
a-
have another thing to do.
Right. But that is also an important thing.
It's a very important thing, and we I don't know if I haven't seen a lot of women DRCM leaders yet.
Really standing out.
Yeah, no, not a lot. We have Greta Thunberg. She's very very vocal, but there's
Or maybe again, disclaimer: we are students, and we might end up saying things that are controversial or weird for
Might
some
not
people.
be okay
we,
with
we,
it.
we don't intend that. We are discussing this because we also would like to learn. Now,
I would actually want to know from them.
right. So, if you have some women champions of resilience or women you would consider heroes of disaster risk management, type them down in the comment section. And we can try to understand better and maybe showcase them when we do another conversation about women and women's role in terms of this particular space we're trying to build. So, this one also might be quite tricky. Women tend to also get in the way of other women. That's probably also why, maybe, one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of women really taking on the more,
I don't know.
or it's not because of women, it's typical of people who are,
It's typical of people, I think.
Okay.
It's not women specific. That issue isn't really women
an issue
specific.
with women. Okay. So, AJ, having gone through several months of the EMDRCM program, how would you now evaluate the impact it has made on you and your future as a woman in the disaster resilience space?
What the program has done for me, I think, is emphasize that there's space for women here. So, not once have I felt in all of our classes, or maybe others have, but I haven't felt that there's different treatment between men and women here. So it's equal
Because the
opportunity
men-
learning.
Because the men in the class are okay.
Our gentlemen, our gentlemen, maybe not. Joke.
So you never felt that there was
I've
an
never-
issue about you being a woman in the disaster space?
No, I've never felt that. I've in our class, the ladies in our class are strong, amazing
And they
women.
can be in the forefront.
They are a lot of the women are in the forefront of disaster resilience. You have LGU
Like the
leaders.
example during the Opsen week. You were mentioning
Oh,
this.
that was fun. In January, for those who don't know, we created an operation center here in school in lieu of classes because a lot of
Just to
the
clarify,
classmates were affected.
We had a makeshift operation center. We did not actually create one.
A makeshift monitoring operation center. So what we did there was
Right.
we tried to figure out.
We got into a lot of controversy with the term operation center.
Mm-hmm.
It was simply a space where we can monitor what's going on.
Monitor what's going on and feed it to our classmate who also works in the National Disaster Risk Reduction Crisis Office Council
Council.
and the Batangas LGU Assistant Provincial
But
Administrator.
the option was
The option
the
was
ladies were
fun
in the
because
forefront.
the ladies were there. We had a lot of activities where we talked to each other, and it was just one classroom, and you have people typing out, receiving the information, and you have Karen, our classmate, being the orchestra, the ringmaster, the not orchestra, the conductor, and saying, okay, maybe this is what you can do, and do it well. This is your expertise. And what I liked about that was that form of leadership was never about this is what you do. It was more of, hey, what can you do best? Maybe that's what you can, that space, do it well, and then let's see how we meld it together. It's
Again,
a,
just to put it in context, it's not as if the men folk of the class were sleeping during that time. To your
Maybe you
point,
were.
maybe I was during that time, but everybody was given
Everybody was
a
doing
role.
stuff, yeah.
Everybody stepped up in during that week, but you have to give it to the women who were in the actually forefront. I would like to use that word, forefront. Kay was at the NDRMC, the OCD.
Yes.
Karen was orchestrating, conducting the OPSEN.
Yes.
You and EJ were monitoring the data, but the guys were also parang pitching in.
A lot of the guys were actually doing response. So back to what we were talking about earlier.
Ah,
Guys
so you put
wanna
the
be
women in the
response.
back office, the men in the response. Not
Maybe,
really.
not really. Maybe that's how it.
It happened
felt,
because
felt
they were
this
the
way.
ones
who were living there.
Right, right.
Our classmate SJ was actually in the field. She was monitoring the data from there. So it's just how it happened. And what I want to take away from that experience is this is such a nice environment for us to thrive. There's no, I haven't felt limited here.
So you would never felt that when you were taking on part of the task of the OPSEN and the data project as a leader, you didn't feel that there were people or men folk who were questioning, why are you going to listen to a woman?
Maybe because the women didn't release. I don't think so. There were a lot of challenges. You were challenging a lot of the ideas, but there wasn't. Oh, you were, but
Questioning.
you were questioning and challenging some of it, but it wasn't an issue of men versus women. It was more an issue of this idea might be better than this idea, and this school environment created that avenue for discourse. That space for discourse, and in any given day, that's always healthy. There's
Right.
always it's always healthy for people to say, hey, something might be better.
And it has nothing to do
It's
with
nothing to
gender.
do with gender. I don't feel that it had anything to do with gender. I
So
don't feel
that's
that at
another
all.
good thing to look forward to for the women who are watching
It's a good
and are
space.
inclined to also contribute to the academic pursuit of disaster risk and crisis management. At least from the cohort 1 perspective, there is a chance for women to really take the lead, share, contribute ideas, and it's a safe space.
It's a safe space. It's a good attitude that we're learning and
It's
building
not because
here.
we're also giving you too much, how do I put it? And it's not because we are condescending or allowing or letting you have your way because we think that, okay, so let them have their
Is
way.
that how you felt?
No, I felt that it was, again, a marketplace of ideas. The challenge were more on the directions, the plans, the processes, how to put all of it together. And it's never about the gender.
It's never about the gender.
And I guess us re-emphasizing that tells us that there is indeed space for women and disaster resilience.
It's good because the women and the men here will carry that back to wherever we're working.
Plus, how would the world survive if, for a disaster, all the men are no longer there? It's just women. So we cannot live without the other.
I've always I grew up in an all-girls school that's very feminist, but I've always felt that men and women
Feminist in a good way, right?
feminist in a good way and women's rights and
Okay.
we fight.
I'm
for
sorry if people
the
might
heights.
think that, okay, there's a feminist in the wrong way.
No. Is there?
I don't know.
Well, if it's abused, yeah, I think it would
Oh,
be.
yeah.
But
Okay.
I think this is my personal opinion that we really complement each other. So in an academic space, this is always all about discourse. This is always about how we can create better ideas by talking about it and building upon each other's ideas better more. So
I will let you have the last word, but I would just have to reiterate the announcement that they asked me to plug earlier. Again, the Women Leaders for Social Impact and Disaster Resilience Forum, initially scheduled for March 12, is postponed in lieu of the precautionary measures that the AIM is conducting to safeguard everybody in the school community and the guests. So instead, there will be an online live session of the forum via live streaming on the Asian Institute of Management Facebook page on the same date, March 12, from 1:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. with attorney Leslie Cordero, senior disaster risk management specialist of the World Bank. The master class on building area resilience for the Calabarzon will push through March 12, 13, and 14. Again, it's not going. The Cavite leg will not happen at the DLSU. Instead, they will communicate to those who are attending the alternative venue for that leg. There are also roadshows scheduled for the Bicol region. Reimagine Bicol, leading innovations for sustainable development and disaster resilience, March 20 for Naga City, March 21 Legazpi City, from 1 to 5 p.m. So, as the last word on women and disaster resilience, AJ?
Yes. Well, I think that for the disaster space, women do have a space. We create our space and we reach for goals that we want. We can always create resilience for the for ourselves, for our families, for our communities, and for our country. And it's always a good idea to look at that. And we're never limited by we're only limited by our imaginations. And yeah, I guess that's it. And sign up for classes.
Thank you, AJ. Sign up for Batch 2
Batch
of the
2. It's a really
EMDRCM
good course.
program. Thank you for joining us for episode 3. And
Thank you. This was fun.
watch out for the announcement for our next episode. Have a nice evening.